Hello, friends of Studio Brûlé. This is Steve Brûlé, and it is coffee time. The time, as you know, where I go over some of the things that come across my desk since the last coffee session. As you can see, I have my Patriarchy VIP Club member card on display, which authorizes me to comment on all the comings and goings of the global evil feminist empire as spread its tentacles around the world in thousands of overfunded feminist organizations. Welcome to Vinyl Meister, Zachary Duffy, quite a few other fellows in here, the regulars, Shadow. Forgive me if I don't call out your name, Gin and Bottle. How you doing, folks? Well, today I'm going to be talking about, the title, Whitewashing Racism. And this is a big push on today, going on in our culture. And it is nothing other than the rise of racism under the guise of ending racism. And we're going to get straight into that. One of the things that I want to point out is we've seen, as you know, and we've talked about this on this channel before, the terms white privilege, white guilt, whiteness, and now white fragility being popularized in our culture. The claims through all of this rest upon the idea that white people can't be oppressed or persecuted because they are the majority. We are the majority. This claim is spread throughout our culture, and I'm going to go over why that is a false claim. The majority of whites are leftist. They are feminist. BLM and Antifa is populated mostly by white people. Whites, in fact, are stampeding to get on board with this whiteness persecution. Who is whiteness intended to attack? Who is this concept of whiteness really intended to attack? At first, the leftists attacked capitalism and patriarchy and the ideologically conservative. These people are a minority in our culture today. And the idea of whiteness is intended to single out the conservative, capitalist edge of our society, which is, in my opinion, a minority today. And this, we're going to go over this in some detail because I think it's important that all of the persecutions of almost all of the persecutions and oppressions of human history have included persecutions of people of the same type. What caused them, one group, to persecute and oppress another is their ideological commitments. Let's go over some of this. First, here's some of the articles that are coming out. This is Understanding White Privilege by Francis Kendall in 2002. Now, keep in mind that all of this stuff that is nominally put under the umbrella of white guilt, white privilege, whiteness, white fragility, the color white is always the first thing. It's always the most prominent thing. It's the thing that stays in people's minds. But the thoughts behind these ideas, they're all cultural. They're all cultural criticisms. They're ideological criticisms, but they're being associated with whiteness for a reason. And let me tell you this, and you guys know all this. The one thing that the 90% or more of people, probably 95 or 98% of the people hearing all this white guilt, white privilege, whiteness, white fragility, they're going to go away with the idea white is bad. White is the devil. White is evil. And what do you do with the devil and evil? You kill it. And that's what we're seeing already rising in the streets of the US. We're seeing white people being beat up, beat unconscious, killed for being white now. And the people who are analyzing these terms, they are very familiar with this process of association and how these ideas will spread amongst the culture. Do you seriously think they don't know that these ideas will be taken to mean white is evil, therefore kill evil, kill white. That's what's going on. They cannot possibly, these pseudo-intellectuals, I'll call them, because they're pulling a trick. They're taking a cultural criticism and they're pinning it on a race, and that is racism. And they're having the result they want to have, which is that white people under attack physically for being white, not for their cultural ideas, not for their ideological commitment or their political ideology, being conservative, but for being white. Let's have a look at some more of this. And this is not just going on in South Africa, by the way, Gavin. This is going on right around the Western world, the entire Western world. This is all part and parcel of this leftist Marxist desire to usher in a one world government under Marxist ideology. Okay, what is white privilege? And I suspect you know that, Gavin, and you wanted to just highlight the fact that stuff's going on in South Africa today, which it definitely is. South Africa is a very complex and difficult country. I wouldn't want to be a white person there today. It is racism. What is white privilege really? This is another article or out recently. And when was that? Fall of 2018. And let's read this little bit here. I'm going to just pop this up a little bit bigger for you. Read from the top. Today, white privilege is often described through the lens of Peggy McIntosh's groundbreaking essay, White Privilege, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack, originally published in 1988. It goes back to 1988, this term white privilege. You see how patient and relentless the left is in pushing out these ideological ideas into the culture. They've been attacking, they started attacking the so-called patriarchy, okay, which then turned into an attack of capitalism. It was always an attack on capitalism. And now it turned into white privilege, white guilt, whiteness, white fragility. It's all about white now. Let's read on here. This essay here, originally published in 1988, the essay helps readers recognize white privilege by making its effects personal and tangible. For many, white privilege was an invisible force that white people needed to recognize. And this is still going on today, 32 years later, they're still pushing this idea that we have white privilege. And I'll tell you this, I started my career in chemistry, in the chemical industry in 1982. In 1984 in Canada, they ushered in the affirmative action program. This was law. And around the same time or just before, they had the Constitution, the Canadian Constitution, Bill of Rights. I may have the term wrong, but in any case, Trudeau Sr. brought that in. And all of the groups identified for which you could not discriminate, they were all identified. The one identifiable group left out of constitutional protections in Canada was white men. Okay, that is in existence today in Canada. It is legal discrimination against white men in Canada in the year 2020. That is institutional discrimination by law, legal. There's no walking that back. There's no hiding it. There's no sloughing it over because white men built the country. No, there's none of that crap. In 1984, they brought in the affirmative action plan and none of us thought that this would pan out because it was such a ridiculous idea to promote people and hire people based on their skin color and their gender. And it was ushered in by a woman who was vice president of research at Dow Chemical, a woman who did not need affirmative action to get to her position of vice president of one of the biggest companies in the world. There was no discrimination that stopped her. Neither did it stop any of the black people who are already successful and multi-other races, of which I've worked with many, just about every race on the planet I've worked with. And they were senior, so they got to their positions before any of this affirmative action came into place. Now, the affirmative action that I lived with throughout my career allowed for everybody but a white man to be promoted and hired and promoted in favor, over and above. Any white man needed to be absolutely, unconditionally, triply better than every other candidate. That's the truth. Discrimination against white men has been with us for 36 years since the law was put in place for affirmative action. Now, tell me, where is the white privilege in that? There is none. There is no such thing as white privilege. It's crap. And they've tried to hide it now by creating this term of whiteness, which is in fact the cultural ideologies, which include things like putting an emphasis upon performance. Being good at what you do is somehow part of whiteness. But that's not how this idea is being taken in our culture, which is why we're seeing the rise of violence against white people for being white. No other reason. And these pseudo-academics, these pseudo-intellectuals pushing forward these ideas, they know full well that that's how the majority of our culture will take and implement their ideas. Let's move on. White privilege, here's another definition. Or white skin privilege is a societal privilege that benefits white people over non-white people in some societies, particularly if they are otherwise under the same social, political, economic circumstances. How is it that there is white privilege for white people when the law specifically does not protect white men and affirmative action requires companies to preferentially hire and promote non-white people, and specifically non-white men? This is a complete fraud that we're being sold, and the reasons for it are to promote Marxism, socialism in the form of a one-word government. Here, Paula Rosenberg's book, White Privilege, came out, I think, a long time ago. I can't remember exactly when. And here's White Guilt, another book. A lot of these books are bestsellers, like the most recent one, which we'll get to in a minute. This came out in 2007, White Guilt. You're guilty of something because of the color of your skin. Here, Whiteness, an introduction by Steve Garner. And this was in, I think it was 2008 or something like this. 2007. Whiteness. You don't even have to have guilt in there or privilege or anything. Now it's just whiteness. How do you think the majority of people in our culture are going to take that term whiteness? How many of those people who are already keyed up to be violent, just looking for an excuse, how many of them are going to even read the two words underneath the word whiteness, an introduction? They won't even open the book cover. They will see whiteness. They will know what they're talking about. And they will see that as permission to go out and beat up or kill white people. And we are seeing it happen today. It's no coincidence. It is no coincidence. Here it is, 2007, this has been around. Now we have White Fragility, which apparently is a #1 bestseller in New York Times. New York Times, #1 bestseller, White Fragility. Why it's so hard for white people to talk about racism. It's not hard at all. I'm talking about it right now. Open your ears. Here is the rise of racism under the guise of anti-racism. This is exactly what we're talking about here, folks. It is exactly what we're talking about. This is a racist book. All of these terms are racist terms. They are all acceptable. They are all promoted in our culture. It is the rise of racism under the disguise of anti-racism. Let's look forward here a bit more. On to the next topic. Here, whiteness as property. In an article in Harvard Law Review, whiteness. Notice that they don't even refer to the fact that this is cultural. These are facets of culture. These are ideological meanings. Property is an ideology, and property rights are ideological. They are not related to a color. and yet the color is the prominent feature promoted through all of these people's writings. Whiteness. This is at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Let's read this. At the National Museum of African American History and Culture, we believe that any productive conversation on race must start with honesty, respect for others, and an openness to ideas and information that provide new perspective. Okay? Whiteness. The rise of racism under the guise of anti-racism. Right there. This is dishonesty right on their front page. Talking about race from the same place. Whiteness and white racialized identity refer to the way that white people and their customs, culture, and beliefs operate as the standard by which all other groups are compared. Whiteness is also at the core of understanding race in America. Whiteness and the normalization of white racial identity throughout America's history have created a culture where non-white persons are seen as inferior or abnormal. Not true, but this is the idea that has been promulgated for 50, 60 years now. These things that they are talking about are customs, culture, and beliefs. Why? I'm going to jump ahead a little bit in what I wanted to say here. Why did they choose the term whiteness and not Western culture or Western ideology? All of them. Why did they not choose the term Western culture? That is infinitely more accurate, or Western ideology? That is infinitely more accurate. No, they chose whiteness for a reason. Ostensibly, they say to dismantle racial category. In some cases, they'll make that claim because they want to identify the fact that whiteness is constructed, and to a degree it is, but no more degree is whiteness constructed than is blackness constructed. These racial categories are constructed. There's as much variation amongst blackness as there is amongst whiteness. But that is not how they define whiteness. Their definitions and all of these treatments, their trick is to define them as cultural and ideological, not racial. The reason they do this trick is that we can all accept problems within the culture and ideologies as being sometimes not difficult on people in general. We can accept that criticism, but they don't use the term Western culture or Western ideology because they want that idea that we have a problem to eliminate, and they want to transfer that idea onto whiteness, onto being white. And they've succeeded. The entire culture in the Western world is talking about whiteness as a problem. How many people in the Western world are going to get that it's a cultural or ideological criticism? It isn't really. That's the trick. They are now setting up the emotional, the psychic urge, the psychic force to justify elimination of white people. Let's carry on here a bit. And this is talking about race at the same site, whiteness and its accepted normality. Look at that. Just look at the statement. Whiteness and its accepted normality. They're using the term whiteness throughout. Also exist as everyday microaggressions towards people of color. So just think about how that term is going to be taken by the 99% of the black people who may go to that museum, African American History Museum site. Whiteness exists as microaggressions towards people of color. Whiteness itself is a microaggression towards people of color. It's evil. What do you do with evil? You kill it. And that's exactly what some of these people are doing. Acts of microaggressions include verbal, nonverbal, and environmental slights, snubs, or insults toward non-whites. Whether intentional or not, these attitudes communicate hostile, derogatory, and harmful messages. How do you combat that? You beat them senseless and unconscious in the street is what's happening. That's the response that they want to be had about this. In this country, American means white. Everybody else has to hyphenate. That's what Toni Morrison wants you to believe. But is it true? In this country, but here's the truth. The term African American was coined by a black man in 1782. You can look it up yourself. And was popularized by Jesse Jackson. African American, the very term that Toni Morrison claims American means white, everybody else has to be hyphenated. No. A black man and Jesse Jackson wanted to be hyphenated. They don't have to be hyphenated. Toni Morrison is deceiving you. Again, she's playing victim. She's acting as if everything she sees and says and does and hears is evidence of her being a victim. The fact is that African American term is what black people choose, decide, want to be known as. They are not required to be known as that. Any black man or woman or any American can call themselves American, and many do. Not all call themselves African Americans. What is Whiteness? By Nell Irvin Painter in 2015. What is whiteness? CSUSM, Ask the Expert, the problem with whiteness. And this is only 1 month ago. Notice how it's now, it started as an analysis of what is whiteness, and now they have so-called academic headlines saying the problem with whiteness. It is not, they don't say the problem with Western culture. They don't say the problem with Western ideology. They are specifically using the term the problem with whiteness in order to associate all Western problems with being a white person. This is the rise of racism right in front of our faces, right under our noses, and the overwhelming majority of people in our culture have their head in the sand and their eyes closed, their mouth closed, their ears closed about this. This is the rise of racism in the West today, and it's just getting started. Let's take a look at why I don't believe that white people being a majority means anything at all. I want to repeat that. White people being a majority does not protect you, does not mean that you can't have persecution and oppression in a culture in which you claim, or at least you're said to be a majority, because this is about starting the process by associating that whiteness with the political ideology in the first place. Let's have a look at other genocides and oppressions throughout history here. Oopsie. Let me get this here over. 1 second. I'm just going to check on something while I'm here to make sure I have all the appropriate things come up. Okay, so let's just plow ahead on these cutouts here. The Rwandan genocide, also known as genocide against the Tutsi, was a mass slaughter of Tutsi, Twa, and moderate Hutu in Rwanda, which took place in 1994. I'm sure most people have heard of this. It was black people against black people in the same country. Now they were ethnic different groups, but let's take a look a little bit closer there. In 1990, the Rwanda Patriotic Front, a rebel group composed of Tutsi refugees, invaded northern Rwanda from their base in Uganda, initiating the Rwandan Civil War. An estimated 500,000 to 1 million Rwandans were killed. Rwandans, killed by Rwandans, okay? About 70% of the Tutsi population. Notice that the rebels were Hutus. Oh, I have to go back on that because I think I've got a couple of things out of order. Here, the point is that 30%, that's 300,000 Hutus who were moderate were killed. In other words, you call it a genocide, but it is political. It is politically motivated in the same way that this whole idea of whiteness is being confused and conflated with Western culture. These 30% of the people slaughtered were Hutus. Hutus were the very rebel group doing the slaughtering their own people. Yet we call it a genocide, and we pretend in the Western world that white people, because in the US, we're 60-something% of the American population, and in Canada, much higher than that. I don't know what the percentage is in Canada, but I think it's higher than 60-something%. You think that you can't be persecuted, but here they're creating the term whiteness, and they're identifying it as a person, a conservative person, typically, a conservative, capitalistic style person. In other words, someone who holds, not just a white person, but a white person who holds a particular ideology. The Hutus were the same thing. They were going in and killing under the pretense of a genocide, or they were going under the pretense of taking over their country ideologically, and they slaughtered 30% of the people they slaughtered were Hutus as well. And you're seeing this in the West. The Antifa and the Black Lives Matter and these groups are mostly white people. They're leftist Marxists who have for a long period of time been building this ideological motive to take over and create a Marxist country and Marxist philosophy implemented through our culture. They're using the term whiteness. That doesn't mean that white people are safe. As we saw here, Hutus killing Hutus, black people killing black people. It's still persecution and it's still a genocide. The persecution of Christians. Let's look at this example. Let's read this from the top. Can be historically traced from the 1st century of the Christian era to the present day. Early Christians were persecuted for their faith at the hands of both the Jews, from whose religion Christianity arose, and the Romans, who controlled many of the lands across which early Christianity was spread. Early in the 4th century, a form of the religion was legalized by the Edict of Milan, and it eventually became the state church of Roman Empire. The Christians were a minority ideologically, but they were indistinguishable from the other people that lived in that very area, very much like white people today. And the whole idea of whiteness is that's being rising today as a rise of racism. They will attack conservative people, those who are identified with, or that the opposition identifies as patriarchy. But it won't stay at that. That's how it starts. It will be used just categorically as white people. The early Christians were a majority, not as their religion. They were a majority of a race of people. That being that majority of race in that period of time did not save them from being slaughtered. Let's read this. This is quite interesting as well. This is from Nazi Germany, before the Nazis got power. In 1933, new German laws forced Jews out of their civil service jobs, university and law court positions, and other areas of public life. Let's read that again. Does that sound familiar to you guys? Okay. A guy was recently kicked out of the board of directors of UBC for liking a tweet that was favorable to Donald Trump or critical of those who criticized Donald Trump. He was forced out of the board of directors. And what did they put in place? A female intersectional feminist. Read this again. This is going on right around our culture, right as we speak. They are kicking any but conservative out of power, and they're replacing them with feminists and ideological leftists and people of non-white. Whiteness has become a liability in spite of being a majority. And white people on the whole are on board with it. Let's read it again. In 1933, new German laws forced Jews out of their civil service jobs. In Canada, I have literally seen 2 examples of jobs applications posted and printed publicly that said anybody but a white man. Not in those exact words, I am paraphrasing it, but it was very clear that white men need not apply because they are white men. Forced Jews out of their civil service jobs, university and law court positions. We're seeing judges being forced out of the bench in the U.S. for unpopular non-leftist judgments. In April 1933, of course, we're seeing a lot of university professors run off campus. Jordan Peterson was basically left and hung out to dry because he refused to accept the compelled speech implied in, I think, a bill, I can't remember the bill number before the House, requiring people to use preferred pronouns. No matter how many thousands they create, this bill is supposed to make it illegal for you to not use the person's preferred pronoun. That Jordan Peterson considered to be compelled speech, and he was basically run off campus for that reason. Read that again. In 1933, new German laws forced Jews out of their civil service jobs, university and law court positions, and other areas of public life. That is cancel culture. Cancel culture is in full bloom today. In April 1933, laws proclaimed that at Nuremberg made Jews second-class citizens. What is affirmative action? What is affirmative action but the exclusion of men and white people from even having an opportunity to apply for jobs? That is what affirmative action is, because we've eliminated the primary requirement of merit. These Nuremberg laws defined Jews not by their religion or by how they wanted to identify themselves, but by the religious affiliation of their grandparents. Religious affiliation. Religion is an ideology. They are doing the same with whiteness today. The term whiteness makes you guilty for being white, but they're defining it in terms of ideological cultural definitions in the exact same way that the Nazis defined their laws against the Jews. We are seeing today, unmistakably, the inexorable rise of racism, full force. And this is going to get worse and worse to the point where it will be a bloodbath. Around the world, we're seeing the violence escalating. Let's read this. The execution of Catholics under Queen Elizabeth Tudor. The 1959 bills made English Catholics guilty of high treason, a crime English law punished by hanging, drawing, and quartering offending men and by burning offending women. It has been estimated that 183 Catholics were martyred in England between 1570 and 1599. If you looked at those English Catholics and those English Protestants on the street, you wouldn't be able to pick one out from the other. You wouldn't. The idea that white people can't be oppressed in our culture because we are the majority is a lie. These Catholics at that period of time in history, they were all white there. You couldn't distinguish them. They were in the majority in that country, but because of their ideological position, they were killed. They were tortured because of their ideological position. I can't state this I couldn't possibly state this more strongly than is necessary. It's an ideological position that they are vilifying now in the West. And that ideological position is on the conservative spectrum. They've been at it with Trump since before he was sworn into office. This is a persecution rising. It doesn't matter whether white people are 60% of the population or not. More than half of those white people are on board with the whole BLM and Antifa movement and their leftist Marxist movements. They will, in the same way as persecuting Catholics in England, they will persecute the conservatives, and they've been doing it. They've been running them off university campuses. They've been firing them. Sometimes they're run off campuses violently. And yet those same people experiencing that violence, in one case a female professor, I forget where the university was, she still stated her support for the position of those who were violent. The fact that you are a majority white race means nothing, because this whiteness is going to start, this whiteness idea is going to start by attacking your political, ideological position. If you are anti-feminist, they will consider you suitable for elimination. If you are capitalistic in nature or conservative, they will consider you a target for elimination. And when they feel they're running out of targets on that, they will turn to the rest of the white people on their team, because they specifically use this term whiteness instead of cultural, Western culture or Western ideology. And the overwhelming majority of people will not see anything but white as the enemy. White is the enemy. And they're stating that. Let's move on. Reading from the top. It is traditionally rooted in the Middle Ages, early modern age, and Age of Enlightenment. Yes, this is Irish, the persecution of the Irish. The Irish also indistinguishable physically from the people around them. A slight different accent from the way they speak. But here, evidence in Irish immigration in Great Britain, North America, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa. Look at how widespread this is. Anti-Irish sentiment can include social, racial, and cultural discrimination in Ireland itself. Even in Ireland itself, the Northern Irish versus the Southern Irish. In the South, they're Protestant. In the North, they're Catholic. Such as sectarianism, I can't say that word, or cultural, religious, political conflicts in the troubles of Northern Ireland. There you have an Irish people persecuted on ideological grounds. But do you think that when they came to these other countries, Australia, North America, New Zealand, that anybody cared whether they were Northern Irish or Southern Irish, Catholic or Protestant? No, they were now Irish. They were associated with their Irishness and persecuted for only being Irish. And this is the same thing that's happening around the world with this idea of whiteness. They're saying it's cultural. They're saying it's ideological that they're criticizing. But all the way around the world, whiteness is being transformed into white people are the problem. White people need to be eliminated. And this will get out of control because the overwhelming majority of people are not going to look past the word whiteness and white. The overwhelming majority who are violent and who incite violence are not going to look past the word whiteness or white to see any at all subtlety or nuance to those terms. Ideological repression. What is it? Ideological repression refers to the forceful activities against competing ideologies and philosophies. The forceful activities. That's what we are seeing. That's why they use whiteness and not Western culture. They want those forceful activities. If they say Western culture, there's no person there to attack. Get this, okay, folks? You really get this. If they use the term Western culture or Western ideology, there's no image of who I should beat up and kill in people's minds. But when they say white privilege, white guilt, white fragility, whiteness, there is a very clear image of who your enemy is in your mind. This is a trick. These people know the trick they're using. They can't rouse a crowd, a mob up to attack Western culture, because where would they go to attack? Who would they attack? There's no way to know. They can't rouse their mob up against Western ideology. There's no place and no physicalness of Western ideology. It doesn't exist in a physical sense. But whiteness does. Whiteness exists. White person. White guilt is held by a white person. White privilege is held by a white person. White fragility is a factor of a white person. Whiteness is what white people are. It's very easy to now, in the minds of the thugs and mobs who are seeking blood and violence and revenge for imagined wrongs, know exactly who to kill. You kill white people because it's whiteness is the problem. White people are guilty. That's why they have the term white guilt. What do you do with a white devil? You kill devils. This intellectual, these academics, pseudo-intellectuals, these frauds, they know what they're doing when they substitute the term white and whiteness for ideology and culture. They know exactly what they're doing. Let's read on from this. Alan Wolf defines ideological repression as the attempt to manipulate people's consciousness so they accept the ruling ideology and distrust and refuse to be moved by competing ideologies. There you go. That is feminism. That is Black Lives Matter, which is a feminist movement. That is Antifa, which is also a Marxist movement, and almost, I would wager a bet that 99% of Antifa and Black Lives Matter are feminists also. In the early days of the Soviet Union and other countries, ideological repression was carried out by political repression of the carriers of competing ideologies. And what are we seeing? This is Marxism trying to crush capitalism. They're even saying it. They want to crush, they want to smash the patriarchy. The patriarchy quickly became the capitalism. They're synonymous terms. And capitalism and patriarchy are now synonymous with whiteness. Let's read on. Persecution. What is persecution? The systemic mistreatment of an individual or people or another or group by another individual or group. The most common forms are religious persecution, racism, and political persecution, though there is naturally some overlap between these terms, the infliction of suffering. Religious persecution, racism, and political persecution. Notice that there is a connection here. These things go hand in hand. Religion and politics are two very, very similar twins. They are both ideological systems, ideological viewpoints. The only difference is that religion attaches it to God, politics doesn't. But religion is politics, and politics is religious in its clinging to belief systems. And racism is a tool to advance that political movement, is a tool. It is, like I said before, there is no face to culture. There is no face to an ideological movement. Western ideology and Western culture doesn't have a face. That's why they use the term white guilt, white privilege, whiteness, because whiteness has a face. You can recognize it on the street. You can then, that can then trigger your anger that built up by these academics trying to build the anger and the racism in the culture to further their political goals. They're building that anger up. They know now that the folks, the thugs and mobs prone to anger and violence have an image of who to be angry and violent at, and that is white. These are the people constructing racism in our day, constructing and promoting racism in our day. It's coming from these pseudo-intellectuals, academics in universities, promoting these terms: white guilt, white privilege, whiteness, white fragility. Let's move on. So here we get to a couple of articles that talk about, that even push forward these ideas even further and even demonstrate what I'm saying. Read from the top of the Daily Wire. You may have seen these already. Virtually all white people contribute to racism. Notice now, they've already wavered completely away from whiteness as a representation of Western culture. It didn't take them very long. It took them months or years. That headline, and they say these headlines, folks, they write these headlines and publish these headlines without any shame. Without any shame whatsoever. They've already veered from whiteness being a word referring to Western culture to whiteness just being white. Now, the target is clearly the white person who needs to be eliminated, because here, as they claim, virtually all white people contribute to racism, and the Treasury Department lectures white employees as part of diversity training. This is the government. This is the government. The feminists and the leftists, through their affirmative action, through their domination of the education system, have got their ideological warriors in every area, every level of government, every institution, every pillar of our culture. The education system, the system of governance, the religious systems, and the industry. They're in all of those places, and the laws make it almost impossible to get rid of them because they are so-called oppressed groups. They have now declared within government that all white people contribute to racism. That is racism itself rising. It is fully ready to explode. And this was July 17th, 2020. Look at that, folks. You probably saw the baseball game where every player and manager and team member knelt in support, so-called Copernic, but it's really in support of Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter is not a black movement. Black Lives Matter is a Marxist feminist movement. Black Lives Matter is promoting these ideas of all white people contribute to racism. Not black people, of course. Black people can't be racist, according to them. This nonsense is fully accepted. It is saturated in our culture from top to bottom. They're building a tinderbox ready to explode here. And it's not far. We are not far away from you being approached as somebody on the street and being told to kneel, not asked to kneel in solidarity, being told to kneel. And the consequence of not kneeling will be beaten unconscious or killed. We are not far from that point. Let's read this from the top. The U.S. Department of the Treasury has been using so-called anti-racism training to tell white employees that virtually all of them contribute to racism and that they cannot object if a person of color, quote, responds to their oppression in a way you don't like. In other words, you're guilty, you sit there and you take whatever is thrown at you. And that is the government today. That is the government. It's outrageous. And the people on Americans are not objecting to this. This is absolutely outrageous. It is racism, pure and simple, exactly like every other oppression of a group of people This all has an ideological base, and it turns into a physical identification. Just like it did in Germany, just like it did with the Catholics and the Protestants and the Irish. It has an ideological base, and it turns into just the person, whiteness. They've already made the verbal, the word, the logos change, that it's white people. And they snuck it in through the back door by calling whiteness, claiming that whiteness just is a word to represent Western culture. But if it was, they would have used Western culture or Western ideology. They're tricking you. They're con artists. They are racists. They are trying to incite violence and the destruction of the Western world. And quite frankly, I don't see a significant enough of resistance to this to stop it. To me, I say to you, I think you should prepare for it because it's coming. It's past the point of no return. All the media are promoting these same ideas. The government is promoting, the education system is promoting these ideas. The legal system is putting this into law. This is racism rising. The tide is coming in. It's coming in pretty fast, and you need to figure out a way to protect yourself from it, to survive it. Let's read on. Did I read that whole quote? I think so. Yeah. Let's read this next quote from that article. The training materials were sent by a whistleblower to Director of the Center of Wealth and Poverty, Christopher Rufo, who is also the contributing editor to City Journal. Rufo produced a Twitter thread to disseminate what he found, calling the training documents deeply disturbing and an affront to equality. Rufo is one of the few people with the courage, and it takes courage to stand up to this, because this is a wall of a tide coming in. It's massive. When a person like Rufo puts himself on record of calling this stuff out, he puts a big target on his head. Now, he's probably fairly well known. Any of us who talk about this stuff and criticize it are putting targets on our heads and our backs. Me as well. But I'm too small. Nobody notices me out there. I don't have enough recognition to be a target. But if you have the recognition, you will be a target. This is a rising tide of racism and is a building fury and rage, and mob and thugs are just ready to tap into that. The training, called Difficult Conversations About Race, is aimed at white employees at the Treasury Department, Federal Reserve, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and National Credit Union Administration, Rufo tweeted. The goal of the training, he wrote, is to convert everyone in the federal government to, quote, anti-racism. And it's not anti-racism. It is racism. It is racism under the guise of anti-racism. That's why they use, I'm repeating myself, but it's why they use the term whiteness instead of Western culture. It is whiteness. They want the public to associate the enemy as a white face. The way the training sets out to achieve this goal, however, appears similar to Rufo's last document analysis about Seattle's internalized racial superiority and whiteness training, which basically consisted of trainers telling white people they were racist. That is what they're doing. Feminists started this whole process over 50 years ago, raising the hatred of men and white people through all of their process of anti-patriarchy, anti-capitalism, then white guilt, white privilege, whiteness, white fragility. Reading from the top, the training is hardly different, with trainers insisting, quote, white employees must struggle to own their racism and accept their unconscious bias, white privilege, and white fragility, Rufo wrote on Twitter. There they are. The White Fragility book just came out a little while ago, and they're already implementing it into the government. That tells you how strong the connection between the feminist academia, the feminist media who are printing this stuff, and the feminist government. The civil servants are mostly feminist. They're mostly leftists. The civil service has enormous power. There was I think an article or a book written on this, that government, but the civil servants really have far more power than the electorate thinks or understands. But look at this here. Struggle to own their racism. This is exactly the struggle sessions of previous dictatorial oppressive regimes. And they are so unaware of the parallels. The public is unaware of the parallels. This is why this movement has so much power and is so dangerous. Reading from the top. Next, the trainers recommended white managers create safe spaces for listening sessions. How is this not like previous totalitarian regimes, where Black employees can explain what it means to be Black and be seen in their pain? Who knows who is in pain? Pain is an experience every human being has, white people included, but they are dehumanizing white people in this entire process. They're dehumanizing white people. Here, white employees must not fill the silence with their own thoughts and feelings. Why? Because really the implication here is that white employees are not really human beings. They don't feel pain. You can't be seen in their pain because white people have no pain. Whiteness, of course, the fallback is it's just a term to refer to Western culture and Western ideology. That's the trick. That's the trick. Reading from the top. The training also stereotypes white people by claiming they hold, quote, fairly consistent narratives about race. Those narratives, such as we've made so much progress from the 60s, and suggesting people, quote, talk about how much we have in common. The training insists are racists and don't support the dismantling of racist institutions. Now, have we not made progress? Is that what they're trying to say? We have made progress since the 60s. A whole pile of progress. In fact, we've made nothing but progress since the 60s. But we're supposed to pretend it didn't happen. We're supposed to pretend. Why don't we say there's been any progress since year zero when Jesus Christ was crucified? Why don't we say that? How dare you say that Christians are no longer persecuted in Christian countries? That's what they're suggesting here. And talk about how much we have in common. Why should we not? And this is insane, folks. This is insane. The way out of racism is exactly talking about how much we have in common as human beings, as men and women. The way out of these sexist, racist, discriminatory viewpoints is exactly to talk about the overwhelming majority of similarities between one another. This is such proof that these people don't want to end racism. They want to make it stronger. They want to create racism. Read it again because it's really unbelievable. Narratives such as we've made progress. Okay, here, suggesting talk about how much we have in common. Is racist? Am I reading this right? Tell me in the comments if I'm not reading this right. But I'm saying here that they're suggesting that talking about how much we have in common is, in fact, not dismantling racist institutions. I mean, I'll be embarrassed if I'm reading that wrong, but I think I'm reading it right. Let's go on here. And because then I still maintain that, yes, talking about everything we have in common is how we get out of and stop promoting racism. Let's read from the top. As you move through the day, what's the racial composition of the people around you, on your commute, at the coffee shop you go to, at the gym, at your workplace, at the show you go on the weekend? What they're trying to say is that you need to view people as a race. They're trying to say that the way out of racism is to see everybody as racial, as races. I mean, there's something wrong with these people. Well, no, I mean, I understand where they're going at. They're pushing their racist, Marxist, leftist ideology. They're trying to create racism. Reading from the top. Later, the training demands white employees provide unconditional solidarity with people of color. Unconditional. Your allyship is not a favor that you can retract when some responds to their oppression in a way you don't like, the training says. So in other words, if some black person says, you know something, I think black people were whipped to death, therefore I'm going to whip you to death right now, you're supposed to unconditionally support them. Unconditional solidarity. No, I'm not going to buy into that. That's crap. People need to be held accountable for their behavior. Unconditional solidarity implies that no matter what the hell they do, you've got to support them in this. That's crap. This is the dangerous ideology that is in every pillar of our culture today. They've separated your responsibility from your behavior, and they've placed your importance or relevance to society based on your race. This is racism. The way out of racism is to hold people accountable for their own behavior and to let people enjoy the products of their own labor, regardless of the color of their skin or their sex, their race, their gender, whatever. But that's not what they're doing. They're specifically creating the acceptable target for hatred and violence to have a white face. Reading from the top. Further, white employees are told that white silence has been one of the most powerful detractors from real progress in social justice. Notice that they just told you before to shut up and listen and don't say anything. Now they're telling you that white silence is another one of the oppressive things. A white person, in other words, can do nothing right because you're guilty for being white. Here. And that they must sit in the discomfort of being lectured about whiteness, racism, white supremacy, and allyship. They're trying to corral you into a no-win situation as very much as corralling you into a boxcar to kill you. There is no way for a white person in their way of thinking to be considered as a full human being, with an idea, a perspective, who feels pain and suffering in their own lives. They are eliminating every aspect of what it means to be a human being for a white person. The only thing a white person can do is shut up and take it. Or when you're told to speak out in favor of Black Lives Matter and Antifa. They want you to shut up with your own thoughts and have none of them, no feelings, but only speak up if you're there to be pushing their ideology forward. It's insane, but this is where we're at today. This is the one at the city of Seattle. That last article was all about the federal government. This is municipal government. And if you don't think this stuff is going on in every city in the Western world, in every level of government, then you're not paying attention. I know you guys who watch this show, you know what I'm talking about. And I feel a little bit weird getting all worked up and preaching to people who already know what I'm talking about. But this is really to make sure that you prepare for this. You are being targeted, and targeted for violence and elimination. Here, the city of Seattle holds training session for white employees, the very same thing as that federal government training session. This is in the post-millennial. City of Seattle teaches white employees to, quote, undo their whiteness in bizarre diversity training session. It's the term whiteness that they want to use. They don't want you to undo your ideological commitments, your ideological biases. That's not what they're talking about. The whole public is reading white, not ideology. And here is the reason, of course, like I've said repeatedly, ideological commitments, ideological beliefs are held by peoples of different races. That's why they don't want to use the term Western culture, Western ideology, because there are a lot of Black people, Indian people, Chinese people, Oriental people of all, Asian people of all descriptions, and even Native American people who subscribe to the very Western ideological cultural beliefs that they want to eradicate here, that they are identifying, and they're calling it whiteness. This is no accident that they're insisting on using the term whiteness. Let's read on. Reading from the top. This is about Seattle. Rufo, the same fellow here. Rufo found out that Seattle's diversity trainers inform white participants that objectivity, individualism, intellectualization are all subconscious indications of internalized racial oppression. Individualism is racial oppression. Objectivity. And let's just look at that term, individualism. That's exactly what Marxists, leftists, socialists hate, is the individual. They want everybody to be part of the Borg, as I discussed in a previous coffee session. Reading that onward. He pointed out the self-defeating contradictions white employees face if they concede to this segregated list of affirmations. If a white employee speaks too much, that's imposition or paternalism. If a white employee speaks too little, that's silence, is also violence. They're trapping you. There is a no-win situation. The only thing left over after that trap is the fact that you are white. This is the inexorable rising tide of racism in the West today. And it's not against Black people. It's directly pointed. It is a cannon. It is an atomic bomb directly pointed at white people for being white. Reading from the top. White employees are also given a step-by-step tutorial on how to be good white accomplices to minorities, practice self-talk that affirms their complicity in racism. In other words, call yourself an evil white person, even in self-talk. That's how much they want to indoctrinate you. You're supposed to start saying yourself, oh, I'm a terrible white person. You have to reject every last bit of this, folks. This poison, I can't even tell you how awful this poison is. We have to reject firmly, with no uncertain terms, every last bit of this racist, bigoted, hateful ideology that has taken our entire culture by storm. All of it. We have to root feminism out of our education system. I've repeatedly said that I think we need to completely scrap the education system from kindergarten to grad school and the universities. And every last one of them, once their job, have to apply again. And if you've ever been promoting these ideas, you're not eligible. That's bigotry, hatred, and racism that they're promoting. And it started in the university system, spread to all cultures in our society. And we can fully rebuild the education system fast. Look how fast they shut down all the economies of the world. That's much harder than doing this education system. We could do this overnight. Fire them all. Self-talk. The only way that white people can be undoing their whiteness. Just look at that phrase. Work on undoing their whiteness. You know how this stuff just boils me. I can't even believe that they're able to get away with printing this stuff and promoting it in government institutions. Undoing their whiteness. Let me tell you, and they know this. How do you undo your whiteness? You die. That's the only way for you to undo your whiteness. And I'm not going to die for these bigots and hypocrites and racist idiots. Let's read on. After these destructive thought exercises, quote, diversity trainers ask white employees to, quote, let go of prescribed niceties only white people can enjoy, such as comfort, Guaranteed physical safety. Control over other people on the land. Let's look at this comfort. Who doesn't want comfort? Are we supposed to not allowed to have comfort that we work for? You tell these people to go to hell. Guaranteed physical safety. There's not one person on this planet that has guaranteed physical safety. No matter how rich you are, there is no such thing as guaranteed physical safety. And how much guaranteed physical safety did that 12-year-old boy in New York City have when he was slammed and almost unconscious by the black guy only because he was white? How much physical safety did that 90-year-old white woman have when that hoodlum smack her on the back of the head and knock her into that fire hydrant? How much safety, guaranteed safety, did that guy who was beat unconscious at Black Lives Matter in Portland, or was it Seattle? I can't remember. There is no such thing as guaranteed physical safety for anybody, but much less white people today. Control over other people and the land. In other words, they don't want you to be... They're actually saying that you have to let go of your property, your house. You don't deserve a house. You give it away. To hell with you. Let go of social status. What social status? They're busy turning us into a target in the Western world. Jobs and promotions rewarded clearly based on race and not merit. That has never happened. I've never seen that happen once in my life. In fact, one of my bosses in my career at Dow Chemical was an East Indian woman. How was she discriminated against? By being promoted? And I didn't discriminate against her. I worked for her in every bit the way I worked for other people. She was not a very good boss, by the way. But that's nothing to do with her being female or being East Indian. This stuff doesn't exist, what these people are saying. This is pure trying to justify racial hatred of white people, relationships with disagreeing white people. In other words, they're trying to say, get rid of any friend that is not on board with this racist ideology they're promoting, and other white normative behaviors. Notice that in the definitions that they have, or what they claim to be saying about whiteness, is really representing Western culture and ideology, they no longer even use the word culture or ideology. They just use the word white. There's a reason for this. They're getting away with it in front of our eyes, creating venomous, vicious justification for killing and beating up white people. This is the vilification of an entire group of people, deliberately, legally, in front of our eyes. Let's read on here to this one. Whoops, wrong button. White employees were even provided a, quote, thoughtful flowchart that outlines the racist cycle white people perpetuate through superior justification, self-righteousness, fear, shame, and guilt over harmful actions toward people of color, smallness, and inauthenticity. White people are unable to imagine a way forward that stems from a place of humanity and empowerment. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Completely stripping the humanity from all white people, they then claim with straight faces that white people are unable to imagine a way forward that stems from a place of humanity and empowerment. Who is it that is not able to imagine a way forward from a place of humanity and empowerment? Who isn't? It is not white people that are incapable of doing this. It is white people, by the way, who are the only group of people to eliminate slavery in the history of humanity, starting in the UK and then in the US. In Western culture, white dominated by far bigger margin then than it is now. If anything, it is white people who have been imagining a way forward that stems from a place of humanity and empowerment. It is white people who are doing that and have been doing that for a long time. Obviously, not all white people. That's because not all people of any race think the same, feel the same. But what is going on here is the creation of the justification for the slaughter, for the dehumanization of white people. This is unavoidably true. Reading here on. This divisive training was segregated to white city employees, teaching them how they have complicity in the system of white supremacy and must be held accountable to Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And imagine how many groups, and I know there are a lot of groups, whose bosses are Black or Indigenous or people of color. And those bosses are probably lecturing those very white guilt people who are under them that they have complicity in the system of white supremacy. It's incredible, folks. I don't know why there isn't outrage about this. There is, but the outrage is from very, very, very few voices who are calling them on this racist, bigoted crap. Read from the top. Upon completion of this virtual concentration camp, the city shares hypothetical examples of success stories so that white employees can recognize when they've finally, quote, interrupted their whiteness and have become white allies. Other white people may be angry, but white accomplices must let go of operating as individuals to adapt to this collective mindset. Remember the Borg. This is a core part of what they're wanting to usher in. Marxist socialist culture. There they are again. They're talking about letting go of operating as individuals. So there's a war on individualism. That's Marxism. That's the Borg they want. And to adapt to this collective mindset. All folks, all these collective mindset, communist, socialist organizations of history have all been viciously brutal, murderous regimes. All of them. They've all had this, quote, collective mindset. They all had a war on operating as individuals. This one is no different. This is what is rising today. And they're going to start by justifying the abuse, the violence against, the murder, the slaughter of white people. I'm saying this not to say that you can stop this or that you should stick your head out, your neck out on the line. I'm not suggesting people should go and stick your neck on the line here. This is a huge tide. I'm suggesting that you be aware of it so that you can chart your life, so you can still live your life in a fulfilling manner. Adapt, find a safe area. Move to a red state if you're American. Don't stay around these leftist Marxist communities. They will target you. Reading from the top. I'm going to keep pushing because this is exactly the kind of thought policing they want to implement everywhere. I think they're talking about Rufo here. He urged, describing the new cultural revolution being fought by corporate human relations and public school curriculums. That's exactly right. It's in human relations. And they don't call themselves human relations anymore. They call themselves human resources. These corporations don't think of you as an individual either. They think of you as a company asset. Read the bottom, from the bottom here. When you find something like this in your community, expose it, criticize it, mock it, and reject it, Rufo concluded. I agree, and I just said I don't encourage people to stick your neck out. We do need people to stick your neck out, but I don't want to say you have to do that if you're going to put your own life at risk. But yeah, if it's safe to do so, I know this is crazy, but I'm sticking my neck out. I'm putting this in public. Anybody who wants to come and see what I think about this crap can come and see it and watch this video. And I do encourage you to spread it. Put the target on my back. There's no other way. I don't want to live in silence. I don't want to sit around editing my thoughts and pretending that black is white and white is black. I don't want to pretend that Western culture is whiteness. It's not. Western culture is Western culture. It's an ideological system. It's a way of life. And it's participated by all races in the US and Canada and around Europe and the world. Western culture is not whiteness. I'm not going to accept that crap, that terminology. I'm going to identify it what it is. It is the new rise of vicious, destructive, violent racism in Western culture today. The identification and the promotion of whiteness as the problem. We actually have those titles in headlines. The problem with whiteness. This is racism rising. Here is Christopher F. Rufo, a man after my heart. He's a filmmaker, director of Discovery Institute's Center on Wealth and Poverty, contributing to City Journal. And he has if you look at his site here, he has a number of films under his belt, and he's quite a young fellow. I can't say I've watched his films yet, but I am planning to. And, folks, having said that, give your support and encouragement to people like Christopher Rufo. He's sticking his neck on the line, criticizing these groups. Spread the video. Watch some of his movies. And like I said before, even though we're surrounded by enemies who want to kill you and hate you, who hate you and want to kill you, do something you love every day. Because at the end of your life, you should feel fulfilled and contented that you lived the life you wanted to live, in spite of this crap. If you listen to these people, you will never live the life you wanted to live. You will never even know who you are. You'll be repeating these mantras of self-hatred in your head. That's the ultimate punishment these people are going to inflict on themselves when they internalize this hatred of whiteness. Don't buy any of it. Don't let any of it into your head. Do something you love today and every day, and I hope to see you next time on Coffee with Steve. Have a good weekend.